Panama has a ton to love, but it also has areas that most people prefer and probably should avoid. But if you're into something a little different and have some guts, they really can be an interesting experience. You'll learn about 3 of those today, so stick around. It's the Unconventional Entrepreneur Show. Welcome to the Unconventional Entrepreneur Show. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. Every week on this channel, you'll find new videos to help liberty-minded entrepreneurs and investors like you find more personal, financial, and location independence. So be sure to hit the subscribe and the notification buttons so you never miss your chance to find more freedom in this unfree world. Most people enjoy cushy, whitewashed beaches, gated communities, and all-inclusive resorts. But you're different, and with the right sense of adventure, some of these places could be places to visit on your next trip. Like most major cities, Panama has its share of swanky areas, not so swanky areas, and downright dangerous neighborhoods. Fortunately, in the last few years, new infrastructure projects have made it really easy to avoid the worst of these neighborhoods if you want to. But if you get a thrill out of seeing the seedier side of the city, and maybe even like that slight feel of danger, you might want to check out some of these places that are off the tourist beaten path. While Panama has several rough areas like San Miguelito, Curandú, Los Angeles, probably none of them have the infamy or the history of Chorillo. It has probably the worst reputation as being a neighborhood that foreigners should avoid. And honestly, the other areas I mentioned really don't have much interesting to see, so they're probably not worth the risk of going unless there's a reason to. But Chorillo is full of history. Before the US invaded during Operation Just Cause, Chorillo was actually a very wealthy neighborhood. Then, during the invasion, it got bombed to hell while Noriega was hiding out in the Vatican embassy. For the most part, walking through Chorillo is not recommended for foreigners. But during the day, you can drive through it safely with a driver you can trust who's willing to do it and knows where he's going. But because of being a wealthy neighborhood in the past, it has some really interesting architecture, as well as one of the few places in the city that has lots of wooden buildings. The outskirts of Chorillo are relatively safe and they're quite interesting to visit. For example, the Santa Ana district and Avenida Central, which means Central Avenue in English, is quite safe to walk around during daylight hours. But they still give off enough of this dangerous vibe to be interesting for most people. Avenida Central is now closed to car traffic and it has a number of different discount stores and it's a lot of fun to hang out on. At one end of it, there's a park that's sort of sitting on the border right between Santa Ana and Chorillo, and it kind of marks the difference of places where you might not want to visit on foot. Chorillo can also be approached on foot from Casco Viejo. And what's happened is Casco Viejo has started to improve and it's pushing its way further and further into Chorillo. And now there's actually restaurants on streets a few years ago you wouldn't have even wanted to walk on and now are completely safe. The tourist police are also usually standing around to turn around any tourists who are attempting to push a little bit too far into those dangerous zones. The next place that foreigners are often warned about is visiting Colón. This historic city on the Caribbean side of Panama was built by the United States back in 1850s as the Atlantic terminal of the Panama Railroad that was then under construction to meet the demands of the California Gold Rush as a fast route to get to California. It's also another area that used to have really high prestige and several wealthy residents. In the past, it was known for dozens of nightclubs, cabarets, and even movie theaters. But riots in the 1960s destroyed the municipal palace, and it really marked the beginning of the end for Colón. The wealthy residents started moving out of the city and out of Panama in some cases, and that caused a decline in the cultural diversity of the area and caused an eventual economic collapse. As with most places, that collapse caused the area to become much more dangerous, and it became known as kind of one of the murder capitals in the region. However, a massive reconstruction project started back in 2014, and that's targeting parks and historic buildings and avenues, and it's making for an interesting visit. As long as you're with someone who kind of knows their way around, that entire coastline, in fact, has been experiencing massive improvements over the last few years. And while Colón itself still maintains that air of danger and there's lots of poverty in the area, it still can be one of the most interesting places to visit in Panama if you're interested in kind of stepping outside of that glass bubble. Finally, we come to the infamous Darien Gap. This dense tropical borders on Colombia and is really the place of legend. It marks where the Pan American Highway that stretches all the way down from Alaska finally ends. This border region is known for being the home of not only drug smugglers and human trafficking, but also the infamous Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, better known as the FARC. This guerrilla group is funded and continues to fund its operations through narcotics, kidnapping for ransom, illegal mining, and extortion. However, the Darien Gap is also home to one of the most diverse wildlife populations on the planet, with several day hikes and multi-day hikes possible. Obviously, the hikes are aimed at the adventurous traveler, and spending time there is going to make you part of a very exclusive group. As you might expect, getting to the Darien isn't easy. You have to pass through several road checks and carry all sorts of supporting documentation. Your first step, if you want to travel this region, is going to be finding a guide. This isn't something that you want to attempt on your own. I know of people who have done it. I also know of people who have disappeared without a trace. After securing your guide, you need to draft a letter to Senafront, which is kind of like Panama's Coast Guard, and you have to ask them for permission. Once you have that permission letter in hand, and you've traveled to the national park through all the security checkpoints, an armed security detail may also be required to accompany you into the park. I've never been there myself, but talking to friends who have been, it is definitely on my bucket list, and I'm told over and over again that it's completely worth the hassle. Panama has something for everyone, and if you're the kind of person who likes to experience maybe that seedier or slightly more dangerous side of life, it can really be extra special. And with a little bit of common sense, you're likely to get out of those adventures just fine. If you're looking for more information on how Panama is to live, and it's more than just a great place to visit, and it's an awesome place to lay your hat, check out the video you see on your screen right now. This is Glenn from the Unconventional Entrepreneur Show, and I'll see you over there.